The sky above Vexor Prime had not been dark for 7 days. It burned. Even 300 meters below the surface, inside the reinforced emergency command bunker, the light of orbital bombardment still found ways to invade. It leaked through camera feeds, tactical overlays, and live casualty reports until the war itself seemed to glow across every wall. Ambassador Crix stood in the center of the command chamber, staring at a holomap that no longer looked like a map of a world. It looked like an autopsy. Red zones spread across continents where Dominion landing forces had secured surface control. Orange sectors marked cities still burning. Gray regions represented communication blackouts, which everyone in the room understood meant one of two things. The infrastructure was gone, or the people were. Most likely both. The eastern shelter grid is no longer responding, Commander Zelk said, his voice scraped thin by exhaustion. Signal relays are failing in sequence. We estimate tunneling machines will breach the first underground population centers within 4 hours. Crix did not answer immediately. His 4 eyes moved from one projection to another, taking in the shape of his civilization's death. 7 days ago, the Dominion Empire had entered the Vexor system with a fleet of 200 warships. The Vexori Orbital Defense Ring, built over 3 generations and praised throughout the Galactic Accord as a model of strategic deterrence, had held for exactly 43 minutes. 43 minutes. That was all the time it had taken for centuries of planning, funding, and military doctrine to become debris circling their own dying world. Now millions of Vexori civilians huddled in emergency shelters beneath poison cities while Dominion drop pods rained from the heavens like metal seeds of conquest. This was not a resource war. The enemy had made that brutally clear. They were not seizing Vexor Prime for minerals, shipyards, or strategic corridors. They were doing something worse. Something colder. They were breaking a species. Another tremor rolled through the bunker. Dust drifted from the ceiling in pale curtains. Several junior officers glanced upward before forcing their attention back to their stations. Everyone here had learned that fear could not be indulged for long. There was always another report. Always another district gone silent. Always another number to confirm that the end was moving faster than expected. The southern atmosphere towers have fallen, another officer called out. Dominion processor units are active in 3 sectors. That pulled a low murmur through the chamber. Crix closed all 4 eyes for one brief moment. Atmospheric processors. The Dominion was not merely defeating them. It was rewriting their world. Altering the very air of Vexor Prime into a chemical balance suited for Dominion biology and hostile to Vexori life. If the process continued, then even if scattered resistance cells survived the invasion, they would survive only as strangers on their own planet. Within months, the weak would need breathing apparatus. Within a year, organized resistance would be impossible. Within a generation, their children would ask what unfiltered air used to feel like. Ambassador, Zelk said more quietly, stepping closer, we have updated responses from the aid requests. Crix already knew what he would hear, but he nodded anyway. Zelk brought the list up between them. The Celestial Union regretted that direct military intervention would destabilize regional peace. The Etherans cited ongoing commitments on the Outer Rim. The Hesh Collective had declined to comment. The Quellins, according to intercepted diplomatic traffic, were already discussing post-war trade concessions with Dominion representatives. One by one, every alliance, treaty clause, and ceremonial pledge the Vexori had spent decades honoring had revealed itself to be worth less than ash. Crix stared at the growing column of refusals until the symbols began to blur together. We stood with them, he said, not loudly, but the whole command floor seemed to hear it anyway. During famine. During border disputes. During the pirate suppression campaigns. We sent ships, medicine engineers. We kept our signatures on every accord obligation. No one answered. There was nothing to say. The galaxy loved principles right up until principles became expensive. A warning klaxon cut across the bunker. New tactical feed. Dominion boring platforms had changed trajectory. Not random industrial penetration anymore. Deliberate. Coordinated. They were drilling toward the major civilian shelter lattice below the northern and central continents. They had stopped hunting soldiers. Now they were hunting everyone else. For the first time that day, Crix felt something colder than despair settle into his chest. Despair still allowed for grief. This was beyond grief. This was the numb recognition that history had already chosen its version of your people, and that version ended in chains, altered skies, and generations raised beneath an empire's boot. He moved toward the communications console at the far end of the chamber. It displayed an archive of known starfaring civilizations sorted by proximity, treaty likelihood, and response probability. Most entries were now darkened, rejected, or strategically useless. Too far. Too weak. Too compromised. Too afraid. Behind him, another impact shook the bunker. In front of him, the list scrolled lower into older contacts, neglected channels, and archived diplomatic entries rarely touched by anyone still hoping for civilized rescue. Crix stopped. One name rested there, buried deep enough that it almost felt forgotten. For a moment he simply stared at it while the bunker groaned around him. Then Commander Zelk saw where his gaze had landed, and the color drained from his scales. "Ambassador," he said carefully, "tell me that is not what I think it is." Crix did not look away from the screen. Every story he had ever heard about humans returned at once, and none of them sounded remotely safe. But safety was a luxury Vexor Prime had already lost. For a long moment, no one in the bunker spoke. The name on the screen seemed to change the air around them. Commander Zelk stepped closer, his scaled face tightening with open disbelief. "Ambassador, the humans have no mutual defense pact with us. No trade obligations. No political ties worth protecting. If anything, that makes this worse." Crix kept his eyes on the archived contact profile. Worse? Maybe. But every civilized option had already failed. Behind them, the central display continued feeding the same nightmare in new forms. Surface shelters were going dark one by one. Dominion landing zones expanded with mechanical precision. Atmospheric processors spread their influence across the planet like a slow poison. Every report confirmed the same truth. Vexor Prime was not being defeated in battle. It was being dismantled. "We are out of allies," Crix said. "We are out of sane allies," Zelk corrected. "The stories about humans exist for a reason." Several nearby officers looked over but said nothing. Even here, in the final hours of their world's freedom, the word humans carried a strange weight. Not quite fear. Not quite distrust. Something more uneasy than either. Crix finally turned from the console. "Say it." Zelk hesitated, then exhaled through his teeth. "They are young by galactic standards. Barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light capability. Yet in that time, they fought 3 major interstellar wars and won all 3. Not because they were the most advanced. Not because they had superior numbers. Because they refused to behave rationally." No one interrupted him. "They turned mining vessels into warships once," Zelk continued. "Improvised weapons. Civilian crews. They still won. There are documented records of human captains ramming enemy ships after exhausting their ammunition. Their military doctrine includes loss tolerances that most species would classify as madness. They do not fear escalation. Some say they welcome it." Crix had heard the same stories. Fragmented rumors from traders, border scouts, and diplomatic observers who spoke of human space the way ancient civilizations spoke of storm gods: dangerous, unpredictable, and best respected from a distance. Humans had isolated themselves from most galactic politics by choice. They signed very little, promised very little, asked for very little. And when they went to war, they ended it brutally. "That is exactly why we should not contact them," Zelk said. "If they answer at all, they may turn this system into something even worse." Another explosion rolled through the bunker, harder this time. Lights flickered. A junior officer nearly fell against his station before catching himself. Across the room, a new alert pulsed across the tactical board. Dominion boring machines had breached the upper civilian tunnel layers. The room went cold. Crix stared at the casualty projection updating in real time, numbers climbing with indifferent speed. "If they ignore us," he said at last, "we die as we are already dying." Zelk said nothing. If they refuse, nothing changes. If they come, Crix looked back at the human contact file. Then perhaps the Dominion learns that choosing us first was a mistake. That is hope speaking, Zelk muttered. No, Crix replied quietly. That is desperation learning to stop pretending it has standards. He reached toward the console. For the first time since the invasion began, the bunker did not feel like a command center. It felt like the edge of a cliff. And Earth was the jump. Crix activated the quantum entanglement communicator. The device took several seconds to initialize, and in those seconds the bunker seemed to grow quieter than it had been at any point during the invasion. Officers still moved. Consoles still flashed. Status warnings still rolled across the tactical displays. But all of it faded behind the single act now unfolding at the communication station. Contacting Earth. Even now, it sounded less like a request for aid and more like the beginning of an irreversible mistake. Signal path established, a communications officer said. Routing through archived diplomatic channels. Range compensation in progress. Zelk folded his arms tightly across his chest. There is still time to reconsider. No, Crix said. There is time to choose dignity. Crix turned his head slightly. Dignity does not stop boring machines. Zelk looked away. The communicator pulsed once, then again, then settled into a low harmonic vibration as entangled relay pairs locked across the vast distance between Vexor Prime and human territory. On the main screen, a simple transmission notice appeared. Connection request pending. Earth Defense Network. Crix stared at those words and felt the full absurdity of what he was doing. He was about to ask help from a species his people barely understood. A species known not for diplomacy, stability, or restraint, but for surviving wars that should have killed them and winning battles they should never have entered. Every account said the same thing in different language. Humans were effective, dangerous, and impossible to predict once violence began. The screen flickered. A human male appeared. He looked older than Crix had expected, with short gray hair, weathered features, and a black military uniform carrying almost no visible ornament. That absence of decoration felt stranger than medals would have. There was no need to display authority on his uniform. It sat in his posture, his eyes, and the stillness with which he regarded the screen. Behind him, Crix could see a command center alive with controlled activity. This is Admiral Marcus Chin of the Earth Defense Coalition, the human said in measured galactic standard. We are receiving an unscheduled priority contact. Identify yourself and state your purpose. No panic. No confusion. No ceremony. Just control. Crix straightened instinctively. I am Ambassador Crix of the Vexori Republic. Our homeworld is under full-scale attack by the Dominion Empire. Orbital defense has collapsed. Surface positions are lost. Millions of civilians are sheltering underground, and the enemy has begun atmospheric conversion of our planet. We are requesting immediate military assistance from Earth. He forced the next words out cleanly. We have no treaty to invoke. No leverage to offer. Only the truth that we are being destroyed. Chen's expression did not change. For a moment, he looked slightly off-screen, as if receiving new data or silent reports from his staff. Crix could hear voices in the background, low and fast, but the Admiral himself remained completely still. Finally, Chen looked back at him. Your position is showing as the Vexor system, he said. Approximately 47 light-years from our nearest outpost. Confirm. Confirmed. Another pause. Crix knew this moment. He had lived through it again and again for 7 days now. This was the space where refusal took shape. The part where another powerful civilization measured the cost, found it inconvenient, and called that calculation wisdom. But Admiral Marcus Chen did not look like a man preparing to apologize. He looked like a man deciding how hard he intended to hit something. Crix held himself still and waited for the refusal. Every instinct told him it was coming. He had heard too many polished rejections over the last 7 days not to recognize the shape of one. First came the silence. Then the private consultation. Then the carefully chosen explanation about strategic limitations, regional risks, or unfortunate timing. Civilized words for abandonment. But Qin did not speak like the others. Instead, the human admiral studied something off-screen, one hand slightly raised as if listening to reports through a private channel. Voices moved behind him in quick bursts. There was urgency in the room beyond the camera, but not panic. Not hesitation either. It felt less like a debate over whether Earth should respond and more like a calculation of how. "Ambassador Crix," Qin said at last, "I'm going to be direct." Crix felt his chest tighten. "The Dominion Empire has been on our watch list for some time. Border probes. Quiet pressure campaigns. Territorial testing. We expected a major move eventually, but we believed they would come toward human space first." The bunker around Crix seemed to fade for a moment. The Dominion had not attacked Vexor Prime because it was important. They had attacked it because it was first. Before Crix could speak, Qin continued. "They made a strategic mistake." Zelk looked up sharply from beside the console. Chen's voice remained level, but something in it had hardened. "By striking your world this way, they have shown us their methods, their confidence, and their willingness to commit total subjugation. Earth pays attention to patterns like that." Crick swallowed. "Then, you will help us?" For the first time, something changed in Chen's expression. It was not warmth. It was not sympathy. It was something far more dangerous than either, the faint beginning of a smile that carried no softness in it at all. "Oh, we'll do more than help, Ambassador." The words settled over the bunker like a temperature drop. Crix heard movement behind the human admiral as officers reacted instantly to some unseen order. Displays shifted. Personnel crossed the command floor with the speed of people entering a plan that had existed long before this call. Chen turned slightly toward someone off-screen. "Prepare the Prometheus for immediate departure. Full combat loadout. Signal the Mars fleet. Operation Hammer is active." Several Vexori officers exchanged confused looks. Even Zelk's face lost some of its resistance and took on something closer to uncertainty. Crix stepped forward. "Admiral, you should understand the scale of what is waiting here. The Dominion has more than 200 warships in our system. Their shields can absorb conventional bombardment. Their fleet doctrine is—" "Ambassador," Qin said, cutting through the warning without raising his voice, "you asked us to send anything." Crix stopped. Chen's eyes locked on his. "You didn't specify size." There was a brief silence after that, the kind that arrives just before thunder. "The Prometheus," Qin said, "is not just anything." Behind him, human officers were already moving with sharpened focus, as though the battle for Vexor Prime had become real to them the moment the order left his mouth. Chen glanced once more toward an unseen display, then looked back at Crix with that same calm, predatory control. "We'll be there in 18 hours, he said. Zelk let out a sound that was half disbelief and half alarm. "That is impossible." Chen did not blink. "With standard travel," he replied, "yes." Then the human admiral's smile returned, slight and cold. "Humans don't do standard." 17 hours and 43 minutes after the transmission ended, every sensor in the Vexor system began screaming at once. The warning tones hit the bunker in a single violent burst. Tactical officers snapped upright. New readings flooded the main display faster than the system could organize them. For one strange second, no one understood what they were looking at. Then the numbers stabilized. And the room went silent. A massive gravitational distortion had appeared at the edge of the system, moving at a speed that made no physical sense. It was not a fleet signature. It was not a standard jump profile. It looked less like a ship entering real space and more like reality itself had suffered a structural failure. "Track source." Zelk barked. "We are trying," a sensor officer replied. "The wake pattern is unstable. Mass readings are still resolving." Crix stepped toward the display, his pulse hammering hard enough to make his vision sharpen. Above Vexor Prime, the Dominion fleet had been hanging in cold, perfect formation for days, confident in total control. Now those formations shifted for the first time. Signal traffic spiked across enemy channels. Targeting arrays rotated outward. The conquerors had finally noticed something approaching that they did not understand. "What are the mass readings?" Zelk demanded. The officer hesitated. Then he said it anyway. Object length projected at over 2 kilometers. No one in the bunker spoke. Even Crix, who had already heard the name Prometheus, had not truly expected this. A vessel of that size was absurd by every accepted doctrine in interstellar warfare. Too large. Too costly. Too slow. Too impractical. No rational species would commit that many resources into a single warship. Which, Crix realized, was exactly why humans had. Then space tore open. Not metaphorically. Not as censor language. Not as poetic description later written into military reports. It actually tore. A jagged wound split across the black between worlds, twisting with violent light as if the universe itself were resisting what was being forced through it. The rupture burned with colors Crix had no names for, shades that looked wrong to the eye and worse on instruments. Several officers recoiled instinctively. One of the sensor displays died outright. And through that impossible wound came Earth's answer. The Prometheus emerged slowly enough to be seen and fast enough to feel like impact. It was enormous. At 2.3 kilometers in length and nearly half a kilometer in width, it dwarfed every Dominion vessel in orbit. Its hull was not elegant like the ships of older civilizations. There were no graceful curves, no diplomatic beauty, no attempt to hide its purpose behind aesthetics. It was brutal in shape and honest in function: layered armor plating, heavy weapon placements, reinforced shield architecture, and the sheer visual weight of something built for only one reason. Commander Zelk stared upward at the tactical projection with open shock. That is not a warship. Crix could barely answer. No part of the Prometheus looked designed to impress the galaxy. It looked designed to survive it. Across the orbital display, Dominion formations were already shifting harder now, disciplined order breaking under the pressure of uncertainty. Their ships had come to Vexor Prime expecting helpless prey, diplomatic silence, and easy victory. Instead, something impossible had entered the system and made 200 warships look suddenly cautious. The Prometheus did not broadcast a warning. It did not demand surrender. It did not announce itself with diplomacy, titles, or ceremony. Along both sides of its vast hull, armored launch bays opened in sequence. Hundreds of smaller craft began pouring into space. And every officer in the bunker understood the same thing at once. The humans had not come to negotiate. They had come to begin. The Dominion recovered from its shock faster than Crix expected. Fear had entered their formations, but discipline still held. Above Vexor Prime, 200 warships rotated as one and brought their weapons to bear on the human vessel. Across the tactical display, energy signatures spiked so violently that several Vexori officers flinched before the firing even began. Then the Dominion fleet attacked. Beams, plasma lances, torpedoes, and concentrated bombardment streams crossed the darkness together, converging on the Prometheus in a wall of firepower so dense it should have erased any known ship from existence. Space itself seemed to vanish behind the brightness of the impact. For a moment, the human warship disappeared inside a storm of controlled annihilation. No one in the bunker breathed. Then the readings came in. No shield fluctuation, a Vexori sensor officer whispered. Crix looked up sharply. What? The officer's hands trembled over the console. I do not understand. The bombardment is not penetrating. It is not even connecting properly. As the glare faded, the Prometheus was still there, untouched. Its shields did not shimmer like ordinary energy barriers. They did not flash, weaken, or deform under stress. The incoming Dominion fire simply stopped at a fixed distance from the hull and vanished into distortion patterns that made the instruments stutter. Zelk stared at the display in disbelief. Where is the energy going? Not absorbed, the sensor officer said. Redirected. Folded. It is as if the weapons are being pushed somewhere else. Crix felt a chill run through him. The Dominion had spent 7 days making Vexor Prime feel small, helpless, and already conquered. But now, for the first time, that same feeling had turned and begun moving in the other direction. Then the Prometheus fired back. A single line of power surged through the center of the human vessel, running nearly the full length of its spine. Every display in the bunker dimmed for an instant as the ship's main weapon charged. The reading on the tactical screen climbed beyond safe interpretation and then vanished completely, as though the Vexary systems had no category for what came next. The spinal cannon fired. There was no ordinary beam. No visible projectile. Just a violent distortion, a spike in reality itself, launched across space with terrifying precision. It struck a Dominion heavy cruiser near the center of the formation. The ship did not explode. It ceased. One moment it existed as a fully armed warship of steel, shielding, crew, and command structure. The next, it was gone, torn apart so completely that the debris field looked less like wreckage and more like matter forgetting how to stay together. A silence fell over the bunker so deep that even the alarms seemed distant. Then the Prometheus opened the rest of its arsenal. Automated weapons platforms surged ahead from the launch bays in coordinated waves, each one locking onto Dominion targets with cold mechanical precision. Along the human warship's hull, secondary batteries came alive in sequence. Mass drivers hurled relativistic projectiles into enemy lines. Heavy plasma cannons burned through space like pieces of captured suns. Missile swarms split apart, phased, and reappeared inside Dominion shield envelopes before detonating. The enemy formation began to buckle. For 7 days, the Dominion had owned the rhythm of this war. Every movement had been theirs. Every decision had belonged to them. Now they were reacting. Now they were breaking formation. Now they were the ones trying to survive the first minute. Crix stared at the unfolding battle, unable to look away. Beside him, Zelk spoke so quietly it was almost a confession. This was never a rescue force. Crix kept his eyes on the tactical screen as another Dominion vessel vanished under impossible human fire. "No," he said. "This is punishment." The Dominion fleet was no longer fighting like conquerors. It was fighting like something had gone wrong with reality. Across the tactical display, formations that had held perfect discipline through 7 days of planetary destruction were now splintering under pressure. Ships pulled out of alignment. Command relays overlapped in panicked bursts. Defensive screens turned erratic as captains tried to respond to weapons they did not understand and could not predict. But the Dominion still had numbers. And desperate commanders often made the same final mistake. "They are regrouping," Zelk said, leaning over the central display. "Outer elements are folding inward." Crix followed the movement on the map. The surviving Dominion ships were abandoning broad engagement patterns and pulling together into a tighter, denser assault block. They were not retreating yet. They were preparing one concentrated strike, gambling everything on the chance that enough firepower in one place could finally break the human warship. On the display, the cluster formed with brutal speed. At almost the same moment, a new transmission channel opened from the Prometheus. Admiral Sarah Conway appeared on the screen. She stood on the bridge of the massive warship with both hands behind her back, her expression composed in a way Crix found even more unsettling than Chen's cold confidence. There was no excitement in her face. No visible strain. No sign that she considered what was happening above Vexor Prime to be uncertain in any meaningful way. "Ambassador," Conway said, "enemy doctrine is adjusting exactly as expected." Crix glanced instinctively back toward the tactical display, then to her. "You predicted this?" Conway gave the smallest nod. "They've realized distributed engagement fails against us. So now they'll seek mass concentration. Centralized force. Maximum shield overlap. It's the logical move." Zelk stared at her. "Then they may actually breach your defenses." For the first time, Conway smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the smile of someone watching an opponent walk willingly into the final stage of a trap. "No," she said. "They're bunching up." On the bridge behind her, human officers moved without wasted motion. One of them reported something Crix could not fully hear. Another confirmed weapons synchronization. The Prometheus itself seemed to shift in orbit, not dramatically, but with the subtle precision of something aligning for execution. Then Conway gave the order. "Fire the Nova cannon." The words meant nothing to the Vexary. The effect meant everything. At the front of the Prometheus, energy signatures rose so violently that every system in the bunker began throwing warning errors. 3 separate reactor readings climbed together, merged, and then vanished into a single output spike too massive for Vexori tactical software to render cleanly. For one impossible instant, the human warship looked like it was holding a newborn star inside itself. Then it fired. A beam of white-gold destruction ripped across the battlefield and through the regrouped Dominion formation. It did not look like plasma. It did not look like conventional directed energy. It looked like a section of a sun had been forced into the shape of a weapon and aimed at a fleet. Ships vanished in its path. Not damaged. Not crippled. Erased. The assault block that had been forming so desperately only seconds earlier ceased to exist in pieces of blazing absence. 70 warships disappeared inside 12 seconds of impossible light. And that was the moment the Dominion broke. Not tactically. Not temporarily. Completely. Across every channel, disciplined command traffic dissolved into panic. Surviving ships scattered in all directions, abandoning formation, abandoning coordination, abandoning the campaign itself. The same fleet that had come to Vexor Prime as the instrument of certain conquest was now fleeing like prey. Crix stared at the debris field spreading across orbit and understood that the battle had just become something larger than survival. The Dominion had not merely been defeated. It had been taught fear. The battle ended with silence. Not true silence, because wreckage still drifted across orbit, damaged systems still burned, and emergency signals still flashed through the debris field where the Dominion fleet had broken apart. But compared to the violence that had filled the sky over Vexor Prime for 7 straight days, the stillness felt unreal. Crix stood before the tactical display and watched the impossible settle into fact. The Dominion was gone. Not entirely destroyed, not yet, but shattered beyond recovery. The surviving warships had fled in scattered vectors, abandoning formation, abandoning conquest, abandoning the certainty they had arrived with. The atmospheric processors on the planet's surface were already being targeted and eliminated by human strike craft. Medical frigates were entering orbit behind the Prometheus. Rescue and stabilization operations had begun before the shock had even faded. The humans had not merely won. They had taken control of the entire meaning of the war. A secure channel opened on the command console. Admiral Sarah Conway appeared again, still standing with the same calm posture on the bridge of the Prometheus. To Crix, that calm now seemed almost more staggering than the battle itself. She had just overseen the destruction of one of the most feared military forces in known space, and she looked as though she were concluding a planned exercise. "Ambassador Crix," she said, "the immediate threat has been removed. All identified atmospheric processors are being neutralized. Medical support is on approach to your major shelter zones. Your civilian populations should begin receiving aid shortly." Crix opened his mouth, but for a moment nothing came out. He had spent 7 days speaking through despair, duty, and diplomatic restraint. None of those prepared him for survival. "What you have done here," he said at last, "the galaxy will know of it within days." Conway's expression did not change. "Good." Crix searched her face. Why? It was a simple question, but it held everything beneath it. Why had Earth answered when no one else would? Why had humans committed this level of force for a world that had nothing to offer them? Why had they come not as negotiators, but as judgment? Conway answered without hesitation. "Because your people asked for help." Crix stared at her. She continued. "You did not threaten us. You did not try to bargain with promises you could not keep. You did not hide the truth of your situation behind pride. You asked honestly with nothing to offer except gratitude. That matters more than most species in this galaxy seem to remember." For the first time since the call began, something in her tone softened. Not weakness. Not regret. Just certainty without cruelty. "And because the Dominion was always going to come for us eventually," she said. "Better to stop them here. Better to save your people and make the lesson public." Crix looked up at the tactical display, at the debris field that now circled Vexor Prime like the remains of a warning written across space. "The lesson," he repeated quietly. Conway gave a single nod. "The galaxy has spent a long time mistaking restraint for helplessness," she said. "It has watched empires consume weaker worlds while calling that order. It has mistaken patience for fear, distance for indifference, silence for weakness. Then her eyes fixed on his with the same cold clarity Earth seemed to carry into war. Now they will learn otherwise. Crix felt the weight of that settle over him. Not just over Vexor Prime. Over every species that would hear what happened here. The Prometheus remained in orbit above the wounded world like a dark monument to a new reality. Earth had sent one warship, and in less than an hour it had changed the balance of power across the stars. Conway's final words came without drama, which made them hit even harder. "If anyone threatens your world again, Ambassador," she said, "tell them humanity has stopped watching from the sidelines." Then the channel closed. And Crix understood, with a certainty that would never leave him, that the age of human intervention had begun.